What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Damp Valley coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Grant Hughes. We are here because All-Star fan voting has opened up to make our All-Star picks. We will get into the criteria we use to decide on them in 1 second. But first, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to us. If you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever. If you're on YouTube, hit that sub button, like, comment, join our Discord. The link to that is in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. And also remember to follow us on all the socials at HardwoodKnocks and on Twitter and TikTok, and then at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram, at HardwoodKnocks on YouTube if you need to know that. If you're watching on YouTube, you don't need to know that. I think that's everything. So go. If you've done all those things, word of mouth recommendations, retweet our promo, shout us out on Twitter, anything you could do to help us continue to build the community. But shout out to all the allegiant, loyal OG listeners who continue to be with us every single episode. We heart you forever as well. I believe that's it, which means we get to the most important question of the podcast. Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing great. I watched some great NBA basketball sporting games last night, and I'm excited to talk about All-Stars because voting opened a couple days before this will go up. So it seems like a good topic to discuss. I don't know about you, but something like this where we have to really just pin down who we think. We'll talk about the criteria a little more detail before we really get started, but like this really forces you to kind of just synopsize the season, and it's like one of those things that's not always the most fun to do, but it does give you kind of a baseline to go forward at the like unofficial 1/3 mark. So yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. It's a good exercise, and I think hopefully we'll have a few surprises or disagreements that kind of get some conversation going.
I'm in agreement with everything you said. It's a very overwhelming process, though, when you have to sit down and then really do it. And I thought I'd be better prepared because of doing MVP ladders every other week, and I just wasn't. It was just like, wow, this is still really fucking hard. Like, okay, I have some names that I know are going to be in here, but sorting them through and then who qualifies for what. I think what's most important, though, and you had sent me this before we had started a few days before we started. We are picking who we think should make the All-Star team right now. And so it's not, who we think is going to make it. We're not even scaling ahead and saying, well, we think player X is going to play a lot better or miss a lot of time from here on. So we did not select him. And so I think it's important for listeners, watchers, whoever, to note that this is more of our own picks as a snapshot in time, because I think some of these names might be in danger of falling out a little bit in the weeks and / months to come.
Yeah. So that brings up I wanted to ask you. So we approached it similarly, where it's very much like who we think ought to make it, not what how many votes to use last year as an example, will Andrew Wiggins get and somehow be a star. It's like not predicting who will actually be there. But I wanted to know, because there are a couple really conspicuous cases where this matters. How much are you weighing, if at all, playing time to this point? Like, if you have a cutoff for, if you didn't exceed X minutes, or if it's less, defined than that, do you have something like that informing your decision? And we'll just say it, in the case of guys like Anthony Davis and Steph Curry, who are going to miss a month apiece, it seems like minimum. How did you weigh that, if at all, in making your choices?
So for right now, the injuries didn't impact it as much for the players who were recently injured. But for guys like Kawhi or Paul George, where the playing time is already deflated and where, there's guys who have played a lot more minutes, like we're talking at this stage of the season, if you've played 1,100 minutes versus someone who's played 750, like that is a pretty big difference in my book. And I try not to view All-Star like that. And I also don't, team record is not, oh, this team is first in the East, so they need 3 All-Star. I don't make picks like that. And I also won't make picks. The Grizzlies are so good, so they need to have 2. I would love to fit Desmond Bane on my list, not to get ahead of ourselves with the snubs, but maybe if he hasn't missed so much time like that, he would have been able to have a case over again, I don't want to get into the names, but the injuries are probably the toughest for me, because part of me is like, and it's when we're talking awards too. Doesn't it matter more about the impact than the availability? Strops, shout out listener from Discord, commented on one of our YouTube channels saying the best ability is ability, not availability. And I agree to that some extent, but when the margin for how good they've been really isn't that, like looking at the guards specifically in the West, when the margin isn't that like, when the margin is so thin between everyone to begin with, or if unless it's someone who's like demonstratively, and I think this has been the case with Joel Embiid, like you can kind of throw away the minutes played with him just because he's been so dominant that yeah, you're gonna pick him over. You're gonna pick him over Brook Lopez, who is like I don't even know if Brook Lopez logged more minutes. I know he's appeared in more games. So like that's something that that I struggle with is definitely the minutes played, but I don't the record stuff just doesn't bother me. And then the injuries, yeah, if it's impacted their playing time to this point, but if you stack up, like Steph Curry's been number 2 on my MVP ballot for the past month. I know that's going to change, but I can't just discount everything he's done when we're recording this, and he's only missed what do you mean 2 games to this point, like since the injury. So that's where I landed. I don't know how you handled it.
Well, I brought it up because that was the thing I struggled with most. It's like I know that those like Davis and Curry, for example, are going to miss enough time to where like within 2 weeks we'll have to be thinking about them. Like Paul George, for example, someone who's kind of on the cusp, or even Embiid, who's played enough, but does by then does like 1,300 minutes outweigh 680 or 750? I don't know. So I have some like I had some struggles with that, and honestly, for in a lot of cases, it sort of came down to positional depth. Like,
Yeah.
Is there a really good candidate that is, say, worse than Curry, that has been worse than Curry, but but in a matter of days or weeks will have played significantly more minutes than him, versus this situation with Davis or Embiid or whoever else, we're talking about. So, I just want to basically I asked you that so I can get out in front of this and say there are a couple decisions I made that I feel really conflicted about, and we may as well just get into it. But yeah, so that's one of the tricky balancing acts. The other last thing I'd say before we start is if there's, all things being equal, I'm going to lean a little towards, statistically, if things are close, I'm going to lean towards the guy that I think I believe to be just the better player, and that's basically subjective. And it depends a lot on like last year or the last 3 years, or, what's he being asked to do situational. There's all these like non-statistical criteria that I use to break a lot of ties or even close calls that if you just really went straight numbers, there are some guys that I think you could argue like I shortchanged, but we'll see how you feel and how the listeners feel about that.
And they're not meant to be vendettas. And the final thing that I'll say that's tough is even though they've broken it down into front court and backcourt, you still run into some issues where I didn't know what to do with Jaylen Brown because everything from the defensive data to where he's actually playing, in part because of the RW3 injury to start the year, points to him as a 3. I think he will be eligible on the ballot to get in as a shooting guard. And I'm sure people have probably named him as a shooting guard to make things easier. I try to look at it's not where a player starts. I look at the possession data where they've played the most, and I do look a lot at sort of defensive roles where I've really tried to figure out like, hey, could I just make Luka a wing? That would have made the West so much easier, but I can't. You can't do it. Yeah. And so I try to look at everything, and that's what that impacts your ballot. Like we might have Jaylen Brown in different spots, but I think he will be eligible at the 2. I just didn't feel right putting him into that slot.
Yeah, I went the other way. I just tried to get the best players on there however I could with like a semi-logical justification for what position I have them at. So hopefully that'll create. So do you want to start East or West? I'll let you pick since I kind of threw this topic at you first.
Let's do the East, and I'm thinking, how do we want to do this? Do we want to break it down by backcourt and front court? So we'll go through backcourt.
Yeah, let's do backcourt starters, front court starters, and then reserves for each, and then the wild cards. Then we can talk about snubs too for each conference.
I'm wondering, dude, should we be talking about it though, like backcourt starter? Oh, because I guess there could be spoilers in the front court starters if we get to backcourt reserves. All right, let's do it. So who are your backcourt starters?
So in the East, the easiest one for me was Donovan Mitchell. He's just
thermonuclear AF, you might say.
He has been that, and for a really good Cavs team that has had ups and downs, but he's just the guy that is driving that team. I don't really know what the argument against him starting would be. I assume you don't have one. The trickier one for me is the other backcourt starter in the East, and I went with Tyrese Halliburton. I think there are a couple guys with good cases, but it's just, he leads the league in assists. He leads the league in potential assists. I think he's a huge factor in why the Pacers have been surprisingly, not one of the worst teams in the league. They play with a bunch of, great pace, the ball moves. And I think he's just kind of integral to that. He's not a great, shutdown defender, but he's in the passing lanes. He does impact the defense, which I think distinguishes him from a couple guys that maybe people will be surprised we didn't even make our all-star teams, let alone start in the backcourt for the East. So those are my two in the East. I feel really good again about Mitchell, but Halliburton, I think there are good arguments that we could have gone a different direction.
So you didn't need to, because I went the same direction. And Donovan Mitchell, I don't know what he is, the lock. There's probably a debate to be had in the second spot. And I think if you view Jaylen Brown as a guard and want to put him here, I think that's probably the name that would get the most love. But Tyrese Halliburton is averaging over 19 points, 10 assists, 1.5 steals, shooting better than 37% on his threes. There are two players in NBA history who've done that for an entire season: Magic Johnson and Chris Paul.
Yeah.
That's legit. Maybe it's a matter of, okay, well, if you prefer Jaylen Brown here, okay, fine. Tyrese Halliburton has been legit. Hashtag Wally Serbiak's an idiot. And I try not to get mad about, I mentioned this to you, I try not to get mad about what local team broadcasts say. I find it more comical than anything. But like when it's an unhinged like that, and you're using, we had people in our Instagram comments were pointing out, well, that was a bad shot by Tyrese Halliburton. One, like step back contested threes have been something that Tyrese Halliburton can hit. Yeah. Two, even if you don't like the shot, imagine using bad shot selection to prop up Julius fucking Randle in the process. That's my mini rant here. Is I don't know if it's because he plays for the Pacers or because like they're, even when they were, kind of on fire, like they faded into the backdrop. He's been an all-star starter to me. Like I will listen to cases for other people, but if you don't even think he's an all-star based off what he's done this season, I would question what your all-star roster looks like.
Yeah, that's tough. And I think it points to the bigger issue of, there are media votes that affect this. And like, granted, all-star berths don't matter as much usually to like say contract incentives or supermax criteria or whatever as all NBA does. But, it's not nothing. And if you have, so I think it's just kind of, we need to get to the point where if you're employed by the team or our team adjacent, you can't be a media voter for all-star. It's not everybody that's that way, but if you kind of go around the league and you spend enough time on League Pass, it's not just the studio hosts, which Serbiak was in that case, but the vast majority of home commentators are, they're catering to a home audience. Their biases come through, even if they don't start that way. I think just constantly speaking in a favorable light towards your team is just going to color your opinions, and you're going to see these. It seems like an easy fix to just not have media that are employed by a team vote for all-star, just because I don't know if Zerbiak has a vote. I assume he does. He's not the problem. There's lots of guys that have opinions like that I think it's just, if you're trying to make this a meritocracy at all, which maybe the all-star game isn't, maybe it's like, it's an exhibition. It's supposed to be fun, whatever.
It's got to come out of contract incentives then, though. And like, we need to stop citing it as like important discourse. No, excuse me, is what I would say. But if you're going to tie it to contract incentives, you need to bounce. I don't know if Serbiak has a vote either, but you need to bounce that type of bias from it.
Yeah. And it's not just him. That was just kind of the egregious example recently.
He called Tyrese Halliburton a wannabe all-star, said he was in his second year when he's in his third, and then was saying that someone like Julius Randle deserves to make it over him. They don't even play in like the same all-star voting field. And I just can't. Julius Randle's like the king of shitty crunch time shot selection. And so like, I just can't imagine using that as the springboard. So I get you're catering to an audience, but that was just, every so often there are just these, even when you're like trying to account for what you're expecting, it's inflammatory and stupid. And that was one of those instances where it was inflammatory and stupid.
Yeah. Not a great look. Who do you have starting in the East front court?
I'm assuming we're going to have the same three here. I have Jason Tatum, Kevin Durant, and Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah, I do too. Obviously Embiid is the surprising exclusion there. We may as well talk about him now because he's obviously on both of our ballots, but
spoilers.
Sorry to jump ahead. I mean, was this difficult for you? I didn't really have much trouble there.
No, I don't like, Kevin Durant leads the league in minutes, and it's just, I've kind of ignored the Nets whenever I'm talking about important discussions, is like, oh, they're going to eventually implode. And like, I've had KD like sort of deflated on my MVP ladder because at one point the Nets weren't good. And then like, well, I mean, you tried to leave this team. Do I factor in you contributing to submarining this like fucking shit show? And now it's just like, KD's been too good there. Giannis has been the Bucks are just quietly the best team in the league again. Like I feel like we should be talking about that a
Yeah.
little bit. He's had some issues at the charity stripe on some of his jumpers. Those have had peaks and valleys, but he's just remained super dominant, especially on the defensive end. And then Tatum, we've seen some pullback lately, it feels like, and his three ball's not falling at the same clip, especially especially off the dribble, but gets to the line more, better driver than he was. The vision, like when he is, like we've seen an assist pullback too, but like this is someone who can really, unless he's playing the Warriors, can control a game as just the primary offensive focal point. And so I don't even know. I guess Embiid would be the only other name you would consider here, but I know we're not supposed to factor in sample size, but when you start to factor in, like at that point, he's played 750 minutes, and I think all three of these guys are over 1,000, and so I think that gets pretty tough to put him there.
I think too, team success isn't a huge driver for me, but the fact that to my mind, certainly the Bucks and Celtics have met or exceeded expectations more effectively than Embiid Sixers have. That's not all his fault, but even the Nets, like if you factor in sort of like how did you think they were going to do in September based on just everything that was going on, and there they are, surprisingly looking like a top 4 seed in the East. And the Sixers, I think probably injuries have had a role to play in it, but have been a little more disappointing. So it's not the defining piece of that argument. It's the playing time, to just full disclosure for me.
Although I was wrong, Giannis is about 820 minutes versus Embiid at 750, so that gap is not that wide. I just think, I mean, Giannis has been the more valuable player to me this season. So I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't feel like we need to. Yeah, I watched all of Bucks Pelicans last night, and Giannis was just. You get these little reminders every so often, not just like you said, how the Bucks look like the best team in the league again. That guy, he's just. There's never going to be a game ever where someone is trying harder than him, and like when you marry that with just his like physical abilities, it's just the floor for that team is so high. Just because even if he's 6 for 17 and can't make a free throw or whatever, he's still just going to be the best player on the floor from an effort perspective by like a mile all the time.
and he might actually just end up even going 6 or 17, still be the best player on the floor because of the amount of attention he commands and then the defensive damage he's able to inflict.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll throw to you again. Why not? So this is where it gets much more difficult. We already mentioned Embiid. Who do you have as your other two East front court reserves?
Front court reserves. So I have Jaylen Brown, Pascal Siakam, and then as we mentioned already, Joel Embiid. Like I said, I put Jaylen Brown in the front court, you put him in the backcourt, whatever. He's been spectacular this season, basically at 26 points per game. Really good efficiency inside the arc. His assists have been pulled up. They're still not like these super complicated passes, but he's been great. Siakam might be an all NBA player, even though I have him as a reserve. If we start to extrapolate how many games does he play, but the Raptors have sucked. That's not really his fault. He's still during this stretch where they're 2-9 as we're recording this. Like he's averaging over 25 points per game, the lifeblood of their offense. I think he's shooting like 35.7% from three during that stretch. I guess you could look at his playing time and be concerned that this would be like a little bit ambitious because I think he had an adductor injury, was it? But he's played more minutes than Embiid. And so like if we're comfortable putting Embiid here, and the Raptors, like if you want to get into the team success equation, they've still outscored opponents by 61 points when Siakam's on the court this season. And so he is the lone player. And I don't know how much this is a factor into, but like he right now is the lone player separating them from complete irrelevance. And I think there's value in that, but he's also just been incredible.
Yeah, so I have two different guys, but both of the guys you mentioned are also elsewhere on my ballot. So the two I went with, and again, this I want to preface this is where it got difficult. I have Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, and one that feels weird to have two Heat players when the Heat, I think, we would all agree have been, not, have not played at a level that meets expectations, but I think, and I'll make this argument for some other situations where I have two all-stars from a team you would not expect. I don't feel like anyone would argue that those two are the problem. For the Heat, it's a depth issue. There's just not enough shot creation. A lot of things have kind of come to a head. But if you just kind of compare some of the candidates, like Siakam, I agree. I think he may suffer from what you said is the Raptors have just been they look so bad lately, and have been such a disappointment in so many predictable ways that you want to like impute some of that to him, but it's just not the case. Siakam could absolutely start But Butler, I think it's been kind of overlooked, and the playing time is an issue for him. I mean, he's played 20 games. Siakam is at 21. Adebayo's at 28. Some other candidates that could have been here are, closer to 30 games. But Butler, if you just, box plus minus is the best of sort of anyone we've mentioned in this, better than Siakam. His value over replacement's higher. We're just going into some of the tie breaking like catch all stuff. So, and then when you watch Butler play, he's still kind of just the same guy where he's, high usage. He's not really making threes, but 62% true shooting. That's, by far and away the best of any of the players we've mentioned here, other than Embiid, that are, potentials for front court reserves. And then Adebayo, he is still so valuable to the Heat, and maybe it's a problem that he is where he is in the pecking order, but he's probably the best perimeter defender among bigs. I mean, I watched him defend Halliburton, almost exclusively. What was it, a week or so ago? And it was the night Halliburton was 0 for 9 and just couldn't get anything against Adebayo on the perimeter. He's not a shot blocker. The Heat need someone to do that, but we've seen Adebayo be super valuable in deep playoff runs because of his defense. So, and when you marry that with what's he averaging? I'm talking about him like I need to justify this, but he's at 20.7 points, 9.8 boards, 3.3 assists, 52.8% from the field, making 84% of his free throws. Like, that's an all-star reserve, I think. It's just, I balked a little bit at, we're really going to have two Heat guys here when, we're going to exclude some guys from teams that have similar records that, have similar like fantasy or box score level production. But, I guess since I'm messing this all up, do either or both of Butler and Adebayo feature on your ballot anyplace else?
They will, and one of them would have gotten a nod here if I put Jaylen Brown in the guard
Yeah.
spot, which is if I had my druthers and wasn't being such a stickler here, I'd probably do that just because I'm not married to like one of my backcourt picks. So I probably would have went with Adebayo, maybe just because he's played so much more. But there's something to me about being like the central focus of your offense, which is why I appreciate what Siakam's done so
Yeah.
much this year. But like it's sort of splitting hairs because you look at him and Jimmy Butler play basically the same amount of playing time. And so I get where you're coming from with Butler. Butler's even hit a higher clip of like the modest number of threes that he takes this regular season, and just the pressure that he's able to put on defenses and get them in rotation and have them overreact, and the passes he's able to make out of them. I totally understand that one, but these two will appear elsewhere on the ballot because they got both my wild card spots. And so
Okay.
I don't know, like, is wild card like more insulting than making flat out reserves? Like, if you weren't going to be a starter, I don't really know that it matters. So they both are on my all-star
Yeah.
ballot.
That's how I view it. Like, wild card feels like, it's the last consideration you make. It's where you squeeze guys onto the roster, but it's really not that different from reserves. And it's got more to do with just positional depth again than anything else for me.
Who do you have as your East backcourt reserves?
So that's where I have Brown. And I think I'm not sure what I would do if I had to make him a front court player. I think I'd probably bump Adebayo down to wild card or just off altogether. But Brown wasn't a difficult pick. I mean, he was even like, since I called him a guard, I think you could make a decent case that he might be the guy that should push Halliburton for a starting spot. But I mean, second best player on, what was the best team in the league for a while may wind up that way. It just, he's making tons of 2-point jumpers, which I think if you're looking for like a point to be skeptical about, that's probably where you'd go. But he's still just the 25 a night guy, good enough defender, has improved off the dribble, gets to the back. It just, we know what Jaylen Brown is at this point, and even if his 2-point jumper shooting regresses a little bit, he's still going to be worthy of this spot. So that's my one. The other is Drew Holiday. I think probably that you could make a decent statistical argument against him just because nothing really leaps off. 45% from the field, 36% from three, 19 points a game. That's anything, lower than 20, you kind of feel like you need to make some kind of excuse for. But I'd just say, like, he's again arguably one of the best defensive guards in the league. He's been the Bucks no worse than their third best player. He's probably right there with Brook Lopez. I think he probably, if you're asking me who I'd rather have just in a vacuum, I think he matters more to me than Lopez does. Just under 8 assists, 5 boards, gets a bunch of steals. Just, he is an all-star to me. And the fact that, again, we've seen him be a vital piece of a championship team kind of breaks any ties, or knocks down anybody else that might have better cosmetic numbers.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's been so important to them as a playmaker while Chris Middleton's missed all that time. And even just like his regular season perimeter game is there again, there are going to be like these stretches where he sort of kind of implodes. And there he can have these wonky finishes, but the off the dribble Drew Holiday jumper in the regular season is a weapon. And so I don't need him to have up above the 20 points per game threshold, especially when you look at the defensive workload that he's carrying, in tandem with all of that. And so he made my East backcourt reserves list. I had my final spot down because I had Jaylen Brown as front court, if everyone remembers. It came down between Jalen Brunson and DeMar DeRozan for me. And I didn't know what to do. I ended up leaning towards DeMar DeRozan because it feels like he's playing more of a heliocentric role. But I also don't know if that actually matters because part of what's so appealing about Jalen Brunson is the scalability here. And DeMar DeRozan is shooting better on twos, and he takes, he's doing well from mid range again. He still gets to the foul line a ton, and he is the driving force, like as a playmaker for Chicago's offense. That's not necessarily a compliment at this point. Neither of them are adding like a ton of value defensively, although Jalen Brunson definitely probably looks better on that end of the floor than DeRozan by like a pretty wide margin at this point. So I could see this spot changing for me, but it's hard for me to ignore just like, 26 points, 52% shooting from beyond the arc. And he is still per unpredictable, leads the league in clutch win probability added. And so like, that's still someone who is able to get you buckets in these really tough situations. Even when, look, the Bulls have not been winning, they suck. They feel hopeless. The Knicks are on a winning streak. So I don't feel great about putting Jalen Brunson in the snubs department, but I have DeMar DeRozan as of right now.
Yeah, the DeRozan was probably my toughest cut, and I might have just looked too hard at just the Bulls being incredibly, underwhelming.
Depressing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I may as well just go into my reserves. Brunson is one, and Siakam we've already discussed is the other. And really, I mean, Brunson over DeRozan. I guess their roles are sort of similar in that they're so vital to like their offense is really getting anything done. If you go down, I'm trying to look at to break ties, trying to look at like RPM or Raptor or things like that. DeRozan's 30th in Raptor wins above replacement. And as I'm looking, I don't see Brunson for a while. Let me see where he's at. Brunson's 22nd. So there, I'm vindicated. Brunson is way better than DeRozan, and we can end the discussion right there.
The advanced metrics love Jalen Brunson more than they do DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, it's tough because you look at, DeRozan's on, I'm pretty sure he's right at 60% true shooting, and he's right under, 60 on the nose, 29% usage. Brunson is 57.9% true shooting, slightly lower usage, 26.1. Brunson actually turns it over more, way higher assist rate, does grade out better marginally defensively, although it is surprising to see that DeRozan, just by win shares and defensive box plus minus, like neither's been, great shakes, but it's Brunson narrowly for me, and team success and role and like just, what's the word even, how integral Brunson is. I think because if you take Brunson off the Knicks, like we're just sort of back to where we were, where the biggest problem is like who's making plays, who's finding these cracks.
He's given them like a crunch time compass, and that's huge for them.
And DeRozan, last year was at a million clutch shots and is great. Like again, this isn't like an indictment of DeRozan. I just feel like Brunson for me has had a marginally better season.
Where did Kyrie Irving factor into this discussion for you? Did you just write him off like I did because he sucks? Like
I did initially, but then as I was having such a hard time figuring out like just the Brunson DeRozan discussion, then you really expand it and think like, well, how much isn't Kyrie at least worthy of that? On stats, he probably is. He's right at 60% true shooting again, great shot creator, all the Kyrie stuff. But if like actually being a positive factor on your team matters, he really hurt the team for a long stretch of the year and is the main reason that we have all these reservations about the Nets' sustainability and, how explosive they are in like all the wrong ways. So I did consider him when it seemed pretty clear that the East wild cards were, other than Siakam, there's some, there are possibilities to get a handful of names in there, but not seriously. I assume you wasn't a factor for you.
No, the numbers make it tough, and it's just like, oh, he's played almost as much as or as Drew Holiday at this point. I think maybe even if not more. I haven't updated the minutes. Yeah, he's played more than Drew Holiday. I just that stuff matters to me, and it's like I think that he seems like he either maybe learned from what happened or gets it now. I think that's even generous. I wouldn't even go as far as saying that, but he hasn't done anything to fuck with the Nets since then, and so that's a plus. But like that, the baseline has to be higher, and when you're talking about at this level, I think every factor matters. And if you can, if you're even at risk of being a detriment for your team because of what you say, because of your beliefs of what you do off the court, that matters. And it's just like, this isn't he missed time with COVID, although he
Yeah.
probably would have been out and about anyway. But this was his own doing. And so I don't even know how to weight that in. This wasn't an injury. This was a choice. And so I think that I can't consider him for this. I can't maybe if we're closer to January and like now the sample size have grown so much and the Nets are still winning, they're not fattening up on an easy schedule. He's been really good when he's on the floor,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna lean toward players that I trust are going to be on the floor.
Yeah, it's just not the same. I think it's more fair to compare the reasons for his absence or unavailability to like someone that's just like taking really terrible shots on purpose or something. Not that he's doing that, but like there's a willfulness and there's like an agency
Yes.
to him being out that's different than he pulled a hamstring or whatever. It's just it's all stars. I feel like at least part of the criteria is you're some level of like unequivocal positive for your team, and that just can't really be said for him.
And
Um,
I think maybe not most, I think a lot of people will just disagree because they view
yeah,
it needs to be just about basketball, or you even said All Stars and exhibition. How do you not want Kyrie in the exhibition? And regardless of what the spirit of the game is, if we're treating these selections like it matters, like it's a privilege, like it's an honor, he just doesn't deserve it. I don't like
sure.
that's not spicy.
Who's your toughest snub in the East? I got a lot.
So I'll list the snubs since you have so many. I'll list the snubs that I wrote down. Jalen Brunson ended up being the toughest snub. I had Brooke Lopez, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley was in there for me too. Trae Young, and then I did write down Kyrie and But I'm interested to see who else was on the toughest one for me was probably Brunson. The DeMar DeRozan versus Brunson debate. I won't say it kept me up at night, but it's something I thought about before I went to bed prior to recording this.
Yeah, that's the dedication that I love to hear. DeRozan for sure. Porzingis, I actually had on there. He was with DeRozan, kind of like, man, am I really going to leave him off and put Brunson on? But the more I looked at it, the more the record mattered, the more the larger body of work, kind of mattered. Because Porzingis, I think most would agree, is playing about as well as he's ever played this year. And it hasn't really been in service of a very good team. Honestly, maybe it's not fair because if Brad Beal had been healthy all season, maybe the Wizards are closer to 500 and maybe it's really like just a coin flip. I mentioned DeRozan. Brooke Lopez was tough, and it's partly because he went off for 30 last night and just was blocking everything and getting Zion like 2 and 3 times in a row on layup attempts. And the game last night against the Pelicans, I guess I should just say Monday night, really was about as good a distillation of what he does for the Bucks as you're ever going to see. Just spacing the floor, hitting threes, dominating the interior on defense. Just couldn't quite get there. Even though I'm sure he's up over 40%, I think from deep. I think he went in on Monday at 39 point something. Irving, I considered. Mobley and Allen. I mean, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. The Hawks are over 500 as we're recording this. Murray, though, just hasn't been as good as last year. His usage is down. His assists are way down. And Young is, what is he at? 30% from three, 28% when I was putting this together a
DeJounte
couple days
Murray's
ago.
out shooting him from three. DeJounte Murray's at 35+%.
It's rough. It's rough. And then again, how much I'm not gonna lie, the weird Nate McMillan back and forth from a couple weeks ago, and then the whispers coming out, I think from Sam Amick, that like if you pulled the Hawks and it was a he goes or the other guy goes, they would side with McMillan. Like that's significant to me. Maybe it shouldn't be. Harden hadn't played enough. Darius Garland just hasn't been quite as good as last year when he was an all-star. Thought about
Yeah, his
Anunoby.
road splits have been wild.
Yeah.
Darius Gronholm versus just wild.
The guy can't stop getting hit in the face. He started the year with that eye laceration. He got cracked last night. He's gonna. I think he might need to get fitted for a mask. But yeah, that the two biggest are DeRozan and Porzingis for me. And I would not begrudge anybody for putting either of them on over Brunson or like Adebayo, even Butler. I'd be fine with that.
Wow. I was so the Adebayo Butler felt like even though they were wild cards to me, had to be on there. I'd be more if you were fungible with the Brunson DeRozan spot for us is the one that I feel like where you can get creative and if I shoehorn Jaylen Brown into a guard spot, bounce them, and then I could fit someone else on in the front court.
Yeah. You know what the thing is? Like, we got Halliburton as a starter. I wouldn't shock me if he just didn't make it, just because, like, not
He's
talking
gotta
about
make it.
not talking about deserving, but just talking about what the votes are going to be.
Wow. I mean, as a starter, he's not gonna make it as a starter. We know
No.
that.
Yeah.
But I would assume that he would make it.
I hope he does. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the league. So that's the East for us. Let's jump to the West. Who are your backcourt West starters? This just go right in. This is going to be really hard.
My backcourt West starters, I didn't think were hard. I thought they were locks, as in Luka Doncic and Steph Curry right now. I don't look if you want to try and project forward, but as of right this moment, I have Steph Curry as a starter. He's been one of the two most valuable players in the league for me to date. And his 3-point volume and efficiency is just absurd. You look at how much he's able to impact the Warriors offense just in terms of uplifting other players' shot opportunities, even when he isn't necessarily directly assisting them. I just watch. All I can say is just watch the Warriors and like slow down a half court set where Steph Curry doesn't touch the ball, and then go watch one where he's not even on the floor, and it's just night and day. So this was easy for me. If we were getting in, well, Steph's injured. How much time is he going to miss? That's not as of right this moment. It's not a factor, and so this is who I would pick right now. And this was really easy, even though the depth in the backcourt of the West is absurd. So I don't mean to sort of dismiss other candidates here. And again, if we were doing this in 3 more weeks or something, it might be different. But I thought this was easy in the moment.
So it was hard for me just because I didn't know what to do with the two factors that the main thing is the depth of the West backcourt. There's what, maybe 5 guys that you would consider even up against, like, say, Donovan Mitchell, if they were in the other conference as like a lock starter, maybe 6. And I just didn't know what to do with the injury. There's so many deserving guys. I did go with Curry, but it was hard because we'll get to all the other candidates. There's so many guys with great cases that are just starting caliber all-stars based on what they've done so far. And the potential missed time is just it gave me pause. But all the numbers you mentioned, like the on-off splits are just ridiculous. Like Steph's plus 16.3 net. He's third in Raptor, second in estimated plus minus, first in offensive box plus minus. All the aesthetic stuff you mentioned, where the offense is a total slog if he's not out there, and or Jordan Poole's not having a career night against the Raptors. That looks pretty good, but that's been once this year. So that, and then Luka, like, I don't know what you even really say. Like, he just, had a record-setting number of 30-point games to start the year. We haven't seen for like 60 years. You have to invoke Chamberlain to, anytime you're invoking Wilt stuff, it's just as a comparison.
His efficiency has climbed from like, well, the 3 wasn't falling, and now it's climbed. The Mavericks can be unwatchable at points, but Luka has been just absolutely fantastic.
Well, and to that point, like, the unwatchability is tied to his ridiculous usage, which he led the league in the last 2 years, and it's up over those levels this year, but he's more efficient. So
Killhouse and Discord had pointed out, and watched the game for obvious reasons because Luka wasn't playing. The Mavericks without Luka basically used Kemba Walker in that role. And so that's more of an indictment now to me. And that was the question we've had is, I'm not going to go off this one game sample and say, it's all the Mavs' fault, but it's the Mavs have not put him in a position to play differently. And this never seemed like an issue of he is insisting that he has to play this way. They've tried to use him in different other modes. They have not been built to do so, and they don't seem inclined to even test out like different other operations. And so I think that vindicates him to some extent. It's one game, but I'm just saying that framing vindicates any concerns you have about, is he part of the problem in Dallas?
It's definitely a good data point because we really haven't had one like that. Because to me, that's kind of the biggest, absolute macroist of macro questions is who is driving this for the Mavericks? Like, who is deciding this is how we're going to play? because it's hard to argue. I mean, it works. The Mavs offense is good, and Luka in this role is why. But is it that Dallas just doesn't trust other people, like that the coaches they've had, because they've gone through a couple, aren't inventive enough to just sort of play a more movement egalitarian style? It's tough, and the fact that they did it without Luka, that's compelling, and it does vindicate him a little bit. But yeah, it's just like we're off. We have to go tangents because there's no possible argument that he shouldn't start the All-Star game.
He is the lock. If you want to start getting into Steph's availability and what it's going to be, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But Luka's here.
Yeah, there's no zero question. I guess we could. Yeah, let's do front court starters before we get to the zillion other guards that.
Who did you have there?
I have Jokic, another lock, really close to the level of Luka. Again, you have to do a bunch of Wilt comparisons. The funny stat to me was, player efficiency rating, say what you want about it, it kind of favors big guys sometimes and guys who get defensive rebounds, and it's kind of one of the dinosaurs of catch-alls. But so, he's a hair's breadth away from matching the all-time single season high he set last year, and he's kind of like deferring more. And so he's just not piling up a bunch of, points and everything, but he's also shooting 62% from the field, 9 assists per game. Just like, I don't know why I'm continuing to justify this is a Luka situation where he's just the best offensive big guy in terms of the total package maybe we've ever seen. He's great. He had 40, 27, and 10 the night before
his scoring is like ticked up too recently because he was definitely trying to defer more. And I mean, Michael Porter Jr. being absent definitely hurts that. I mean, look, you cite the archaic PER, which I'm shocked that you did, but like he's second in value over replacement player. He's first in estimated plus minus. Like he's been dominant. So yeah, he was the easiest front court selection in the Western Conference for me.
And the best of those is Raptor. Raptor has always loved him more than, because it always loves his defense for some reason. I don't know what goes in that makes that the case, but he has, in terms of wins above replacement judged by Raptor, he's basically 2 ahead of the second place player, which is Doncic, who we just went on about being the biggest lock on planet Earth. So it's just like, however you want to get there. The other two, Zion is one I felt pretty comfortable about. He's one of 2 guys averaging 25 points with a 60% true shooting percentage. The way that the Pelicans have, just put the ball in his hands and let him facilitate, let him make stuff happen downhill. He leads the league in paint points per game. Just the Pelicans have the second best point differential in the conference. This was without like 15. No, they've only gotten 15 games from Brandon Ingram. So defensively, he's trying harder. He's paying more attention. First 2 plays of the game against the Bucks on Monday, he had like alert steals that, were him paying attention and anticipating and just going and getting the ball. I can't remember a stretch last year where there were 2 possessions in a row that happened. So no problem there. The other one's Anthony Davis, kind of the same logic as Curry. He's like a top 5, top 6 guy in most of the catch-alls. He's 4th in Raptor. Crazy box plus minus. He was really the only reason the Lakers had a good stretch of this season. Would have been a defensive player of the year candidate, may still be if he gets back on the the good side of that month timeline. So I have no problem if Davis doesn't make it for people as a starter just because of the playing time stuff, and the Lakers suck, but that had nothing to do with him. So those are my start. Do you have the same 2 others, or do you think of someone else?
And they were easy for me to go there.
If you're not considering the playing time thing, Davis should be ahead of Williamson probably.
Yeah, I mean, sure at this moment, but like Zion has just been incredible, and I can't get over every time. I shouldn't still take me aback, but like someone with his build having his just like nimble feet and ball handling and the ability to change, it just doesn't make sense. He's like, I tweeted the other night that he is oh my fucking god personified. Like he's OMFG incarnate, basically. Yeah. Davis was a monster, and you mentioned the defensive player of the year. He wasn't really getting a lot of love in that. He was everywhere during that stretch. It's like if you're going to gravitate towards Brook Lopez or Bam Adebayo or OG, like I totally get it, but like he was going to be in that conversation. Like he was at that rate, and I didn't consider like these were the 3. I think if you were going to say, well, you have to remove Davis off, that becomes an interesting conversation. And so if you have the availability concerns that you want to project forward, it still just feels like Zion and Jokic are just easy locks for the starting slots here.
Yeah, I agree. What about West backcourt reserves? Let's just jump to there.
So I had Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Devin Booker as my two reserves. Shea comes awfully close to having a starter's case, and I think he will, depending on how much time Steph Curry misses. Will the voters see it that way? He's just been incredible. When you look at, there is no, we talk about Luka's centrality. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander's right there. It's not necessarily on the same level, but he is, when you look at like players who are averaging at least 20 minutes a game, Luka's the only player who's getting more of his made buckets without assists. Like there's just Shea. He is the absolute life force around which everything Oklahoma City is built. He drags them to competence or better in his minutes. And he's been super clutch this year. He might be, I saw it was a wild tweet from Brian Kowalski of Hoops Hype that he's hit like more game winners this season than anyone has hit in a single season over the past decade already. It's like the guy just has it. And I will say, like everything about his offense we've known, like the change of cadence, his ability to cause havoc inside the arc, even the passing, the defense has by and large been better this year. There's been some like push and pull back here and there, but like he's been a lot harder to screen this season. He's kind of just been more active away from the ball, more locked in on the ball. This is someone who is still on the fringes of the MVP discussion. I ultimately don't think the Thunder are going to remain relevant long enough to float him there. And I think people will be uncomfortable giving MVP to a playing guy, which is, that's another conversation to have about how we decide MVP. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's just a different discussion. So I'm not going to get into it. But he's been one of the, right now, I think, I don't like saying these offhandedly, so I'll hedge a little bit, but like he's been one of the top 10 to 12 guys in the league
Oh
this
yeah.
season. And so the fact that he's just a reserve, it almost feels icky, but he was an easy reserve pick for me. And then when you're looking at, there are a lot of options here when you're looking at the Devin Booker spot, like John Morant, Damian Lillard, De'Aaron Fox, Desmond Bane. Bane, I was able to rule out just because he doesn't have the playing time at this point compared to everybody else. Devin Booker, aside from being just a human bucket, and who now has, this is not like he's already on a career trajectory where you want him to be better than Melo. He already has more 50-point games than Melo, though. Isn't that just kind of weird to say? Devin Booker's 26. So, but he kept the Suns afloat when CP3 was out, Cam Johnson was out. Yes, you got contributions from Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton, and they've gotten like really huge, uh, a great impact from like a Josh Okogie's been good for them lately. Damian Lee's had some really big moments for the Suns. Cameron Payne's been like a steadying force for them relative to last season. Like Devin Booker is very much, yeah, he went through that slump, and there were points where it looked like he didn't have the same burst. He might have been injured. This dude has been, he's on the fringes of the MVP discussion too. He's maybe inside the top 10 of that right now, just like he was last season. And I don't think we fully appreciate how important he still is on offense. When you look at the number of double teams he draws, the decision making he's made out of those, and then just his ability to work in different capacities, where we're sitting here like, whoa, Trae Young struggling in Atlanta, and there it feels very my turn, your turn, or Luka Doncic, like how you have to build stuff around him, or the same thing with James Harden, where Devin Booker's just so comfortable moving everywhere without the ball. That scalability of stardom is, I think, rarer than we credit for someone who is so good on the ball. And he actually wound up being, when I started to really think about it, I dug into the numbers. There's a lot of similarities and other ways you go. But when I started to think about it just philosophically, I felt like he was the right pick and that it wasn't necessarily all that close.
Yeah, I think the scalability, other than Curry, I think he's by far the most scalable of all these guys we're going to consider for West backcourt spots. I mean, maybe Luka is, but like we spent some time talking about, we don't really know. Probably not.
Right.
I think, yeah, he's got a pair of 50-point games. He and Embiid are the only guys with multiple 50 spots this year. He's got 5 40-point games. He's made at least half his shots in all those games. So it's not like he's just out here, gunning. But again, the through line for a lot of these guys, Booker and SGA, I think, are somewhat similar, is like there's not a ton of help. You mentioned that some of the Suns guys you might not have expected have stepped up, but like Payne and Torrey Craig are 4th and 5th on the Suns in minutes.
Right.
So like you've had no Crowder all year. You've had Ayton miss multiple games a couple times. You've had Paul miss multiple games. His lift has been heavy, and it's not quite the same as SGA and the Thunder, because I think people do when you're playing the Suns, it's like we got a game tonight. When you're playing the Thunder, you can let SGA most of the time get 40, and like everybody else on that team is like 21 years old and has barely played professional basketball. It's just like both of those guys. So those are my two as well, Booker and SGA. They both have had just massive roles. for slightly different reasons. Like the Suns didn't expect it to go this way. The Thunder kind of did. But yeah, Gilgeous-Alexander leads the league in clutch points, made free throws. That it's just like, that stuff earned largely Russell Westbrook an MVP one time because he was just winning clutch games for this same Thunder team over and over and over. So if we're just talking about all-star and you need to, point to stuff that distinguishes a guy that's like also averaging 30 a game, leads the league in drives, you can't stay in front of him. SGA's clutch stuff really does matter. So those two were, again, we'll get to the other West backcourt guys, but just what a ridiculously just deep position. I think both of those guys you could stack up against Donovan Mitchell, like I said, and you would have a long conversation about who would start over him if conferences didn't matter.
Who were your West frontcourt reserves?
This was where it was kind of unfun. So the first one is LeBron, and I really did think beyond. It's LeBron. He should be an all-star just because that's how it works. The other is Paul George. I'm open to the minutes counter argument, but I think the Clippers have after some fits and starts, like they look like about as good as anybody in the East West record wise. He was the main reason for that when he's been healthy. And the third one's Domantas Sabonis, who probably has the easiest statistical case of those three. But just, to look at LeBron per 36, and this is the other thing. He's playing tons of minutes again. But per 36, he's at 26.8 points, 8.5 boards, 6.4 assists, shooting a lot more threes, not really making them, but he's at just under 57% on twos. The defense comes and goes. I think he picks his spots, but like we made this argument for another team. The Lakers being disappointing just to me doesn't have anything to do with James and Davis. It's the fact that 3 through the rest of the end of that bench is the worst in the league, arguably. So I don't have a problem with now putting a second Laker on the ballot. It just, I get it if you want to look at the team that's probably not going to make the play-in and say, how do they possibly get 2 all-stars? This is just an exception. There's 2 great players on the Lakers, and like LeBron is one of them. So it wasn't, I'd be curious if you had anybody else over that. Sabonis, I think, is the most important player on the Kings that have been one of the more surprising teams in the league. He's averaging over 6 assists from the center spot, over 11 boards, 17 points, shooting over 60% from the field. Defensively,
40% on threes, by the way. Wow, just 1.1 attempt per game, but that's
it's not nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think defensively, I still have questions about how he's going to hold up in games that matter, but that's just not a factor here. He's been super productive.
And he's held up better this season as sort of just like a baseline rim protector than I thought he was going to.
I don't understand how that's happening because the number, you're right. His defensive field goal percentage inside 6 feet is surprisingly good. Just when you watch him just never get off the floor, it's I don't know how it's happening, but do you have anybody different or have anything to add on those 3?
I do. So Sabonis was the easiest inclusion for me. He's just sort of the through line that makes everything work for the Kings. And I think he's sort of emboldened even Fox to be better about his decision-making, both on and away from the ball. And the screens he set still open up a ton of room for everybody. He was when I was doing the front court reserves of the West, he was actually my first guy. I was like, all right, well, I know he's in. I went with LeBron for pretty much everything you said. It's not a legacy pick. He's averaging 27 points, 6.5 assists per game, and he's shooting almost 57% inside the arc. And like, he's been a lot better lately too, if that's going to matter to anyone at all. And then, so the final spot here came down to Lauri Markkanen and Paul George. I went with Lauri Markkanen, and Paul George has been, I think, better than people sort of credit him when he's actually been healthy. He's averaging 23.5 points, 5 assists, basically shooting 38% from 3. Markkanen is sort of just, I mean, he's been great. He's at 22.3 points, 2.2 assists, shooting 42.1% from 3 on 6.5 attempts per game. Getting to the foul line, I think, more than most people realize. And the other thing with him is that, yeah, I mean, the playing time thing here matters. He does have, if you want to go that route, almost 300 minutes more played than Paul George, which, whether you think that matters or not, whatever, the Jazz have been surprising. Markkanen is a huge part of that and has been their best player for the most part during that stretch. And he opens up so much because he's still more of an anomaly for what he can do, where it's depending on what spot you're playing him on offense, you're not getting that shooting elsewhere. If you've been able to steal minutes with him where he's more of a wing, that's worth too because of what he does when he puts the ball on the floor. And I think I keep going back to the lineups too. So many of them that he just helps unlock, and the spacing that provides for all the guards and the other primary ball handlers in Utah's offense. And I think that matters to me. And also, look, to this point, if you wanted to, I will not play this card. This did not factor into it, but who has been the better team? Like,
Yeah.
the All-Star game is in Utah. And so, like, it's, the Clippers are a little bit better, but like the All-Star game is in Utah. So he's been more available. Does that factor into what you're doing at all? Or does it matter that the Jazz have been shockingly okay? Does it matter that they've pulled back? Because now that the Clippers haven't even had like pristine availability yet. We've seen more of Kawhi, more of Paul George, and yet they still have the better record. So yes, if you wanted to go with the better record, I understand the Paul George pick. And I think in a vacuum, Paul George is the better player. Now, if we're fast forwarding a few weeks, but right now, I just have a tough time leaving Markkanen off because I think he's been a huge part of the functional thriving in Utah, not just for what he's done, but the way that it sort of just opens up things for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, Markkanen has the minutes argument. That's a big one, 300 plus extra minutes, like you said. And the Jazz don't have the Clippers record, but they do have a positive point differential on the season, and the Clippers do not. So, like, if team success matters, and you're going to make, well, the Clippers are 18 and 14 or whatever it is, and the Jazz are, I think, 17 and 16. Small, but I think it's at worst, it's a wash in terms of team success.
I think what makes me so uncomfortable is this sounds egregious on its face that I went with Markkanen over Paul George. And I don't think it's as egregious, even if, I mean, clearly you disagree. So,
well, I do, but Markkanen was like my most difficult snub. Sorry, he doesn't. There's two more good guards I think we both have on the West wildcards, but all the points you said. I think the case I would make for George, while acknowledging that, like, I would have no problem if Markkanen made it over him because 300 plus minutes at this early juncture, like, really matters. George, I think the Clippers sort of, other than John Wall, and because Kawhi has missed so much time, George has been tasked with just so much like point guard stuff that he's had to do. And so while Markkanen does open everything up for Utah and really matters and enables other guys, George, like, whatever the notch above enabling is, like, George, I think has done that for the Clippers. Like, he actually makes the offense semi-functional, which without him, it just wouldn't be. And the defense, we didn't, who cares about defense for an all-star game, but George is still one of the best, most versatile wing defenders in the league. And Markkanen is just a different type of player that doesn't bring that kind of impact. But again, like, if I could have squeezed Markkanen onto, but here's the good news. We're going to probably have at least one injury in the West that we're going to get a replacement or two. And I think Markkanen's definitely going to make the roster. But he was my toughest snub.
Everything shifts too if we assume that Anthony Davis falls out of the discussion either because of his injury or just doesn't get. I imagine he'll still make it, but
yeah.
So that shifts everything up. But that was the toughest decision for the West All Stars for me, was because it sounds egregious, but I think because of the minutes discrepancy here being so large that it's not unfair to put Mark in there. Who did you have as your wild cards in the West though?
I had Dame Lillard and Ja Morant, and Lillard didn't really factor in as a starting consideration, but Morant at least initially did. Lillard, I think, has only played 20 games, but basically he's been, this is a guy that he's made, I think, 6 All NBA teams, and his last healthy season, he was on one, and he's basically putting up the exact same numbers as he did in 2021, like 28 points, 7 assists, just under 4 boards, with like a 45, 39, 90 split. Like, just, if he'd played 25, 28 games, absolutely he's in. I think we got to discuss him with SGA and Booker, if maybe not Curry and Doncic to this point, because those guys are like legit MVP level stuff.
It's so tough. Who are you bumping for Dame or Ja at this point?
Yeah, and Ja,
I think people will say, well, look where the Grizzlies are in the standings. You definitely need to bump Ja. Ja missed some time too, been some pullback on his 3-point percentage, had some weird like free throw excursions this year. I think both Shea and Devin Booker have probably been better defensively than him. Shea has for sure, and I would say probably Devin Booker as well. Splitting already thrice split hairs, but they're on the All-Star team, and I don't think Ja or Dame had a case for a start. I mean, I guess if you're deciding to bounce Steph, the case is, oh, Steph can't make it because of his injury, and that's where you start to open up the starting discussions.
Yeah, I'm probably going Booker or SGA over Ja for if I got to move Steph out of the starting group, and I'm not sure which way I'd go. But like low key, Morant has really cool. Like December, his numbers are not good. His shooting splits have gotten kind of ugly, and he's only averaging only 22.5 points a game in
That's
December.
it.
Yeah,
Scrub.
the October stuff though, still when he was like, "Oh my God, Ja's going to win MVP," I think those games still count. So.
Who are your toughest snubs for the West?
Marketing for sure, and the only other one I really seriously considered was De'Aaron Fox, but there's no room. I couldn't get there.
He was my hardest. I wanted to figure out a way to get him on, especially because I tweeted at the beginning of the year that De'Aaron Fox is playing all NBA caliber basketball. There's been his shooting has fallen off since then, so there's that to consider. But who do you put him in over? I think if we had to replace one of the 6 guards that we ended up picking, because I had this, I don't know if I said this, I have the same wild cards as you and John Dame. I guess he has the best chance of beating out Dame.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And if Dame continues just to play and be available, then he doesn't really have that great of a chance. So that was a tough snub for me. And I also had Desmond Bane and then Paul George, of course, who wasn't able to squeeze on. Anybody else?
No, that's the thing is like, I mean, there are names like Gobert, Cat, like Wiggins, but like
Wiggins, if he never got hurt, might have had a stronger case.
yeah,
Than
but I mean,
has
he's
here.
just missed too much time, and I mean, even Draymond has had like quietly a really good season. But I didn't seriously consider anyone other than Markkanen and Fox, both of whom I think again like have a great chance of actually making it just because of injuries and guys that just don't play. Markkanen, especially, like you said, it's in Utah. There's like the stars need to align, I think, and make that happen.
We need to just get him on there. I was trying to will it into existence. It'd be funny if they trade away both their all-stars right before they had the all-star game and then still had an all-star anyway. That'd actually be kind of cool.
I would respect it. We didn't talk about James Harden at all. I'm just jumping around now since we've basically finished, but just didn't play enough. I think he might have had a case, especially because the East was, not as guard laden as the West. But I'm just trying to make sure we cover all the bases here. I didn't really have anybody else on either conference that got serious consideration for me.
I will say, unless we're forgetting someone just like profoundly important, the West felt very cut and dry in terms of, okay, these are like the 15 guys or whatever it ended up being for us that you can consider, and there's not really much else. The East was a little bit more open-ended because, like you mentioned, I didn't even have DeJounte Murray or Trey on my initial list of snubs, like until you had mentioned something to me. So
yeah,
it's just like you could have went a bunch of different directions there. The West felt a little bit more finite in terms of the options.
Is there anyone this is just I'm just going to stump you and throw you an unfair question. Is there anyone that you're really disappointed, like if you'd said at the beginning of this season, this guy will get 0 all-star consideration, who would it bum you out that was the answer for?
Probably Darius Garland. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think he's been bad, but he missed all that time, and then he's been stop and start a lot for his season. I think you could I was like pretty hopeful that James Harden would be more part of this discussion. Was it because he was just hurt? I do think mostly that's what it was.
Yeah.
Did anybody else strike that for you? I think Garland would be my pick there. Maybe
Selfishly,
Beal, but like I didn't really know what my hopes were. Maybe Van Fleet a little bit, but I apologize. Who would it be for you?
no, I mean, there's a handful. Like Scotty Barnes was one. Like I was, kind of hoped he would make a leap. But really, the number one guy is Mobley because I've gone to bat so many times, just so certainly saying that this guy's going to win more than one DPOY. Like he's going to be the best player on. If the Cavs are ever great, he'll be the reason. And he's been very good. I like gave him some passing consideration, but there was really no good argument to put him on there, especially if you look at some of the catch-alls and the advanced metrics. It's just not favorable for him. I think Garland and Allen probably both have better cases if you want a second Cavalier. But I thought Mobley it is a little early. I thought maybe the leap was going to happen this year, and it's just been like a mild step forward.
I think that's okay though, just based off where he started, and also he's 25th in VORP. That's not really that low. I thought he was higher in like maybe it was
Raptor really hates him for whatever reason.
Wow, and you would think that him being from Canada, that wouldn't really be a case. Like he's also 10th. I don't cite win shares anymore, but I just because it's in front of me, he's 10th in win shares. I mean, the Cavs are good. Mobley's part of it. There you go.
Yeah, maybe we're using different ones. EPM and Raptor didn't like him, but I didn't look at win shares or what'd you say, VORP? Really, he was that high in VORP? That's impressive.
Top 25.
Played a lot. He's been healthy. That's helped.
Do you want to take us out of here?
Yeah, like Dan said at the top, thank you for listening. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening, whichever podcast app you're using. If you follow us on YouTube, you see all the information there. You catch up with us on our socials, join our Discord. That's where we've gotten a lot of great discussion. Everybody that's been active on there and everybody that's joining, we're getting more people all the time. That's awesome. If you've done all those things, if you follow us everywhere, you can follow us. Please just tell a friend if they like the NBA and they want, good coverage of stuff you're not maybe going to hear about on some of the national podcasts. And we'll get to your team at some point, every week, probably with a pretty good level of depth. If that's an NBA fan in your life, if that describes someone, let them know. Let your enemies know, let people you hate know. That helps too. Anyway, we go out the same way we always do, with an apology to Jared Allen, who I think we mentioned, but not seriously as an all-star, but just a general apology. And once again, a shout out to the one and only Frank Ntilikina.